Hi, I'm Glyn Dewis. I'm a portrait photographer based in the UK, and I'm really excited to be able to talk to you today about my 39 to 45 portraits project. Now, this is a project that I came up with just over 2 years or so ago now, and it was a way for me to be able to say thank you to our surviving World War II veterans. Because what this project was all about was touring the UK, certainly before all the lockdown and restrictions that we've all been living under. But I was touring the UK, photographing veterans in order to give them a classic timeless portrait completely free of charge that they could keep and then could remain in their family for generations to come, for them to remember what their particular member of family did all those years ago that allowed us to live the way we do. And like I said, this is a completely self-funded project, and I guess more than anything it's a way that, well, the only way as a photographer that I could think of saying thank you for the sacrifices that these people made. Now, I'm going to kind of take you through a bit of a behind the scenes, talk about some of the people, obviously, because I could talk about them for ages, but I want to talk to you about some of the people. But before we do that, I just want to give you an idea as to how the project first came about. Because I know when I kind of first started out as a photographer, kind of around the time when I didn't really know what I wanted to specialise in, I eventually found out it was portraits. But regardless of what it is that we're going to photograph, I remember one of the best bits of advice I was ever given was about having a personal project, of which there are many, many benefits. The fact that it keeps us excited, remembering why we picked up a camera in the first place, which I think is particularly important for folks who make money from photography. To have a personal project that kind of takes you away from client work and is something that you do just for you. The benefits are so many, keeping you excited, keeping you learning and what have you. But I remember when they've talked about this, having a personal project, they kind of said that, do 20 images at least. It must be containing 20 images. And there's lots of reasons for that. But I think one of the reasons I took from it was the fact that if you choose to do a project, let's say on portraits, and you choose a certain lighting style, if you do that lighting style a minimum of 20 times within that project, it's going to become second nature to you. You're going to know it. Obviously, there's always more to learn, but you're going to know it. So whatever environment you find yourselves in, because you've practiced and practiced and practiced, you're going to be able to adapt to that environment and still get the results that you want. Now, I was fully on board with the idea of having a project to do. However, it was a case of what on earth is that project going to be? I didn't have a clue, so I kind of plucked an idea out of thin air, and that was one where I thought, well, I love animals. Okay, I love animals. I kind of know my way around Photoshop, having started out in this whole creative world as a retoucher. So I thought I will do a project where I go to animal parks, wildlife parks, zoos, which I didn't really enjoy going to, but going there with the intention of photographing animals in captivity to then come home, get those pictures into the computer, cut the animals out of their enclosure in Photoshop, obviously, and then put them into scenes that I've made up. So it kind of made it feel as if I was setting them free. I've never been on a safari, so this was kind of like, for me, the next best thing. But it felt good. It had a real feel-good factor about it. Now, I'm not going to take you through all the pictures for this project because that's not what this talk is about. But I am going to kind of settle on this picture here because, strange as it may sound, this has got a heck of a lot of relevance for the project now where I am photographing these veterans, but also, to be honest with you, with many other portraits that I take, regardless of what those portraits are for. It kind of sounds weird, but let me just quickly explain. This picture here is of a chimp called Zayden. I'll never forget her. I met up with a group of friends down at a place in the UK called Monkey World, which is in a place called Dorset. Beautiful part of the country. But this monkey world has been set up by some people to basically rescue all kinds of primates from predominantly all over Europe. And a lot of them come from Spain, where maybe they've been used on beaches as beach entertainment. This one here in particular was used on the beach for beach entertainment. But when we went down to Monkey World, with the intention of me really taking some pictures so I could do like a composite, with trees in the background and all that kind of stuff. But when we went down there, it was a beautiful day. All the primates, the chimps, apes, monkeys, whatever, they're all out climbing around on their safe environment enclosure. But on the actual indoor area where they would ordinarily spend the night sleeping, one of them was inside still. And that's this one here, Zayden. I'll never forget her name. Now I go into there to look at her. Nobody else was interested because they're all looking at the ones having fun climbing around. But I look at Zayden sat in the corner. Now you can't see it because it's out of camera now, out of camera shot, but in her hands she's holding a towel and she's rocking backwards and forwards. And I remember distinctly a member of staff coming in while I was the only one in there just looking through the public viewing area at Zayden while she was sat in this corner. And I said, what's wrong with her? Why isn't she going out? And this member of staff goes on to tell me that they never get sponsorship for her because they can never get a good picture because she just very rarely goes out, even though she can do. The more I looked at her, the more I was drawn into her. But you could see that she was suffering mentally. You could also see that physically she was suffering because there was lacerations on the top of her shoulders and down the upper part of her back that had healed now. But there was also traces of cigarette burns on her forearms. She'd clearly been through it. Now, what really drew me in was the fact that she was just sat there looking down. And it might kind of sound really strange, but I did take a picture of her, many pictures. I kind of boosted up the ISO on my camera, making it really sensitive. And I pushed the lens hard up against the big, thick security glass, rattled off as many shots as I could in the hope that a few would be sharp. And like I was going to say then, it might sound really odd to say this, but it's completely irrelevant that I took this picture. But this was definitely the first time ever as a photographer that a portrait or a picture, in that matter, any picture, just had actually stopped me in my tracks and made me think, well, there you go. It made me think, what have you been through? What have you seen? What are you thinking about now? And it really did draw me in, as opposed to like I would before, maybe looking at pictures and just swiping on a screen of an iPad and going, oh, that's nice, that's nice, that's nice. This one properly drew me in. For me, it did have a story. And I'd heard so many times before this when people say, oh, my pictures have a story. And so many times I've kind of scratched my head and not really known what the story is. They've had to explain it. Didn't need any explaining. This one just didn't. And like I say, it's completely irrelevant that I took this picture. But just seeing her, and I think it was the fact that she's looking down. She's not eyeballing the camera. She's looking down. Just really drew me in. Now, this is something that I have adopted in my modern day portraits now, these veterans and anybody that I do a portrait with. And I'll explain more about that in a minute, but it is proving to be incredibly effective. I'll explain more about that in a minute. But moving on, I kind of mentioned about doing this animals project. One thing I'll say about projects as well is that maybe you'll find the first one you do, if you kind of do what I did and pluck an idea out of the head, it won't be the first one that really draws you in and makes you really want to go for it. It'll be like an interim one that will lead you to your main project. And that kind of happened for me, for definite, because I went to the cinema, and this is going back, like I say, two and a bit years ago now, and saw this film. Now, this film is it's basically a remake of what was a very popular weekly comedy serial that we used to have on TV in the UK. It's called Dad's Army. It's based on a group of people that were all over the UK that were either too old, too young, or not fit enough to go and fight on the front line. And their nickname was Dad's Army, but they're actually called the Home Guard. And I remember seeing this film, which was absolutely fantastic. And I remember coming out of it and sort of speaking to a friend of mine the following week, a friend of mine called Barry, and I thought, wow, I said, I would love to photograph people like that. Real characters, rather than me always having to, source a model or a friend of a friend who knows somebody's kind of good looking, and then organising some studio time and thinking about a theme and posing and styling, which I really struggled with back then. I want to photograph real people. And as it happened, my friend Barry said to me, you do realise there is a local group to where we currently live. And at the moment, as I'm recording this, I live in a place just outside of Oxford in the UK. And I never knew there was a group local to here called the Oxfordshire Home Guard Living History Group, like a reenactment group. No, I had no idea they existed. So I went online and I actually found them on all places on Facebook. And I got in touch with them to say, look, this is who I am. I'm a photographer. I'd love to come and meet you with a view to maybe photographing you. And they were really gracious. They said, absolutely no problem. Come along. We meet in this particular little village hall twice a month on a Wednesday. Come along to our next meeting. And I was super excited about it. However, that excitement changed to concern very soon before I was about to go and meet them. Because I was thinking, well, look, these people do this year in, year out. They live, eat, sleep, breathe the 1940s. They go to schools to teach kids. They go to memorials, exhibitions. They do shows. They've been photographed so many times. Why on earth would they entertain me coming to photograph them when really they're probably thinking that what I'm going to do is no different to anything else they've had done over all the years before. So I kind of felt like I need to kind of show them that I want to do something different to get them on board. So what I did was I went online and I looked for work on places like Pinterest, places like that. And I found work by photographers that I absolutely love. I mean, two of my favourite photographers. You've got Yusuf Karsh and you've got Annie Leibovitz. Now, these pictures here I got off Pinterest and I put them onto my iPad. You've got the iconic picture there of Winston Churchill taken by Yusuf Karsh. I love the backstory behind this one because to get that pose, Yusuf Karsh, just before he's about to take the picture, he takes a few paces forward towards Winston Churchill and snatches the cigar from his mouth. And that's the expression he got. I love that backstory. But then you've also got the pictures there of the Queen, Sir Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen. Now, all very different pictures, but in some respects, very similar. And by that, I mean the lighting style. It's very simple, predominantly one light. I mean, the Queen's there is one big window, so it's ambient light, but it's still one light nonetheless. But it's classic, timeless photography. And I thought, this is what I need to show them to say, look, this is the kind of feel that I want to do with you. So sure enough, I'll go to the meeting. They make me get up and do a talk for like 5 minutes, which I was not expecting. And I could, as I'm trying to explain to them verbally what I want to do, I could just tell by their faces that they were thinking it's going to be like everything else they've had done before. Until I got my iPad out. And I got my iPad, I held it up and I said, this is what I want to do with you. And it was just like night and day difference. All of a sudden, they were on board. I could hear them around the table. Oh, that's nice. Oh, I like that. Oh, yeah. Oh. So now they could see it. All of a sudden now it wasn't just me that was excited, they were excited as well because they could see the kind of thing that they were going to get. And that was it. I'd won them over, if you like. So the next meeting they had, which was 2 weeks' time, again, they invited me to come along, but this time to take the photographs. So they had their meeting where they do their drill practice and what have you. But then I started to take the pictures. And this picture here of a guy called Peter is one of the first ones that I took during that particular sitting. And this was great fun because I'd decided to keep the lighting simple, really, really simple. I mean, you can see here an example of what the kind of setup was at that time, using grey paper behind them. Why was I using grey paper? Well, it's dirt cheap. At the time, I used to use this quite a lot because in post-production, in Photoshop, I can add a texture to that grey paper to give it a completely different look. It could be a texture that I take with my phone. And I can just use a blend mode to add it onto that grey texture and just completely change the look of it. And it's costing me absolutely nothing. But you can see there the lighting setup. One light, a large octa to the side and forward of the subject, which you'll know will give that kind of cross lighting kind of feel where you've got the one side of the face lit, the other side in shadow. But just by playing with the height and the angle of that light, we can then start to introduce Rembrandt lighting, which is where on the shadow side of the face, we can get a bit of light to land on the cheek just below the eye in like a triangular shape. Classic, timeless lighting, like the Leibovitzes, like the Yusuf Karshes of this world. Just wonderful stuff. Every day I was with them was a school day. We were just learning so much, but it was great fun because of me keeping the technicals really simple, I was able to do what I should be doing as a photographer, which is concentrating on the subject, engaging with them, learning about them, having fun, getting them relaxed, made a huge, huge difference. Another thing that made a huge difference to me was when we were doing stuff outdoors. This was like a real awakening for me, if you like, which sounds kind of crazy, but my mentality at the time, maybe just before I started this project, was that I had this kind of thinking there. Every time I did a photo shoot, I felt like I had to do something different the next time. And what I mean by that is the technicals. So for example, let's say a week ago I had a personal photo shoot and I'd used one light. My mentality was that if I've got a photo shoot coming up this week, then I've got to do something different. I used one light last time, so this week I'm going to have to use 2 lights, or maybe a reflector, or just something I thought had to be different. And what photographing this home guard people, this reenactment group, really showed me very quickly was that's not the case. It's not the technicals that should change, it's just the content. The content changes. So I'm doing this lighting style again and again and again, becoming so incredibly comfortable with it. Of course, there's always more to learn. That's what I love about it. But generally becoming really comfortable with it, allowing me to then really put the effort where it should be, like I said, with the people, and thinking about how, what kind of scenes and pictures we can kind of come up with. Absolutely made a huge difference to me. It really, really did. But I was really getting into this now because I've always had an interest in World War II, the 1940s and the events all around the war. Absolutely really, really into it. So I started to do more pictures to do with the 1940s. And you can see here, this is a picture that I thought we'd do of a young boy that's been billeted, taken away from living with his family in the cities, places like London that have suffered horrendous bombing, to then go and live with families they didn't know in relative safety out in the countryside. So here you can see I thought it'd be a good idea to have a kid with odd socks on, dirty knees, sitting on a train platform. I was absolutely loving this kind of stuff. But one thing that happened, which I just did not expect, as I'm sharing these pictures on my website, on social media, giving a bit of behind the scenes, I got contacted by some people who were putting a book together. I got an email from them to basically say that they were putting a book together, and this wasn't a book that was going to be on Amazon to make them their fortunes. It was a church group who were compiling a book which was recording the stories, basically, of their eldest members of congregation, stories of what it was like for them when they were children during wartime. And they went on to say that they would love to have the picture of the young boy on the stairs as the front cover. Could they do that? And I was like, absolutely you can. They're not here to make loads of money. He said, absolutely you can. I said, but on one condition. And that is that I can photograph the people who are going to be in the book. Because my thinking was, this is another chance, another way that I can get my camera in front of real people, willing volunteers, if you like. So that's what we did. I went along to their church. We did 2 particular visits after their service, set up with a really small footprint of kit, and started to photograph people who were going to be in the book. And because I'd practiced this lighting style and it was really kind of comfortable for me, again, I was able to concentrate on the people. I didn't necessarily direct them or tell them to pose in a certain way. I merely helped them to the chair and a table I put there, which I got from an antique shop before going to the photo shoot. And by talking to them, getting them relaxed, they just sat how they wanted to sit. I didn't tell them, hold the photograph up against your chest. They just naturally did it. So that for me was just kind of really felt like I was photographing them as opposed to a staged them, if that makes sense. This lady here, you can see she brought a picture as well, but she also brought along a doll's house. You can see, just see it on her right shoulder there. That's the same doll's house that her dad made for her when she was a little girl in the 40s and used to play with during wartime. I couldn't believe she still had it. I thought that was incredibly sweet. But this was great because we made some great friends and really, sort of went out for lunches with them. It was just how photography should be, how I felt it should be. Just fun, comfortable, capturing the real person and just having a great time. Now, it was around about the time doing this that I suddenly started to realise what I would ultimately love to do as a photographer. Clearly got this interest in the war. I thought one thing I would love to do is to photograph real World War II veterans, to be able to give them their portraits. Classic time of portrait that they can keep and their family can keep for generations to come, like I explained earlier. The only trouble was I didn't know any veterans. Now, my granddad, who is no longer with us, he died in the mid-80s, 1986. He served with the British Army, but I wasn't doing this back then. I certainly wasn't a photographer back then, and I wouldn't have been able to do what I'm doing now. But I remember looking for, again, I turned to the internet, and I found a group of people called the Normandy Veterans Family and Friends. And it was a closed group. I asked if I could join it. Miraculously, they allowed me to join it. And once I was joined, I then explained who I was and what I'd like to do ultimately, which was basically to be introduced to very elderly people, to then go into their homes to photograph them. And if you think about just even saying that now, that's a huge ask. That really is a huge ask. A complete stranger turning up to say, look, I'd like to come and photograph some very elderly people. There's all kinds of implications there. Trust, safety, security, you name it. It's a big ask. Thankfully, there was one lady who did, and I won't say trust me, she checked me out, for want of a better phrase. And she says, I know somebody who you can come and photograph. And it is a World War II veteran called Laurie Whedon. Now, this is the picture here that I ended up taking of Laurie, but Laurie Whedon was a staff sergeant during wartime. He was in the Army Air Corps and he was a glider pilot. So this is, Laurie, what Laurie would do is he'd kind of pilot the Horsa glider, the engineless aircraft that were towed behind the Dakotas or the Halifaxes and towed into the war zone. And once that cable was released, they were going in. Now, in the back of the glider, there would be all manner of things. It could be equipment, it could be vehicles, but a lot of the times it was soldiers. They were transporting soldiers directly into the war zone. But not just the soldiers behind them. You see, people like Laurie, they were known as the ultimate soldier. So as soon as they landed, they weren't just pilots. Once they'd landed, they then became infantrymen and had to go out and fight the fight. They were the ultimate soldier. And I'll be honest with you, I was actually a little bit starstruck speaking to Laurie. It's the first veteran I'd actually met and had time to sit and talk with. But it was just a wonderful experience. It really, really was. And I think you can see here, like behind the scenes picture of when I'm photographing Laurie at his home. And that's the thing, all the pictures that I do of these veterans, apart from on a couple of occasions, they've been at that veteran's home, because this needs to be something that is entirely convenient for them, not for me, for them. But also when I do photograph them at their home, one thing I insist on, so that they feel safe and comfortable with me turning up, is that there is always a family member or friend there. Certainly the first time we get to meet. Well, here you can see me photographing Laurie. Now this, because of space, although I'm only using a small amount of kit, you can see that I'm having to do this in the galley of his kitchen. But the kit's kept really simple. Nice, simple, collapsible background, which is the same background actually that I've got behind me right now as I'm doing this, made by Westcott. And I feel like I've arrived in life because it's actually called the Glyn Dewis Vintage Grey. But when you look at the lighting style here as well, look at the lighting. Again, I'm using that Octa, but look at the light in the back of the Octa. It's just a 4 AA battery speed light, keeping things really simple. Now you'll notice as well where you can see me sitting, there's my camera, but it's on a tripod. And I actually have had quite a few people say to me, look, why are you using a tripod? You're using flash, and flash we know freezes motion. Why do you need to use a tripod? And I kind of explained that it's got absolutely nothing to do with the fact that I'm using flash, but it's got everything to do with relaxing the person. Now I kind of jump forward to this picture here. This is of a veteran called Reg Charles. And again, you can see the setup. So no matter where I am, that setup is remaining similar, constant rather. Again, you can see cameras on the tripod. But the reason I show you this picture here is because you can see kind of how I am positioned when I'm taking the picture. And you can see that I'm above them, always maintaining the eye contact. And that I have found has made a huge difference. Whereas before, once I'd had like a cup of tea or coffee before we do the photo shoot, getting to know each other, I would say the majority of the time I spend on a photo shoot isn't doing the photo shoot. It's sitting down, getting to know each other, getting relaxed. And that could take maybe half an hour, 40 minutes. It doesn't matter. But eventually then we'll go, tell you what, let's get this picture done. Then we can do it. It's out of the way and we can carry on talking. But talking about Reg, I want to kind of show, actually this picture here, I'll show you this one. This is where I went back to see Reg. And this was like the third time to give him his picture. Now, and something I do with all the veterans in this one here, I find it really important, is that I always go back to see them after the photo shoot and hand deliver their portrait. There's lots of reasons I do that, but one of them, which I was really surprised about, I didn't know this kind of went on, but when I first started this and started to meet veterans, it was actually disgusting to find how many of them had been photographed and promised a photo, but they'd never seen it. Or maybe they'd been interviewed by somebody and they'd never seen the interview. I did not want that to be me. Do you know what I mean? I wanted to be a man of my word. So I made a point of going back with the pictures. Now, the thing I also do with the pictures is I don't just give them a floppy print. I will actually pay the extra bit. I mean, £3 which obviously is a bit more of an investment, but the difference, that £3, to put the picture into a mount to then give to them, makes a huge difference, makes them feel extra special, which is what I want for this project. But you can see here on this picture, Reggie's one isn't just mounted, it's also framed. And there's a reason for that. And I'm not exaggerating if I say here that Reg has pretty much changed my life. And when I say that, I mean for the good. Definitely for the good. Long story short, I'll kind of let you know, just a long story short, is that every family, regardless, has got problems. I think it's fair to say that. Be they big or be they small. My family's no different. I've got a big family, 4 sisters, 3 brothers. But many years before meeting Reg, and we're talking a lot of years before meeting Reg, I kind of got to the point where I thought, do you know what? I don't need this. And I put my hands up and thought, I don't need you people in my life anymore. Do you know what I mean? And I kind of pulled away. So we're talking, it could be up to maybe 16 years before meeting Reg that I'd done that. So I'd not seen my family, any of them, for all that time. And I kind of thought I was dealing with it, but really I wasn't. There was little times when I'd probably get more annoyed about something completely unrelated. And I'm sure that is because in my head, I still wasn't dealing with not seeing family. But I see Reg. I go back to give him this picture and we're sitting down. And I'll never forget it. I'm looking around his house as we're kind of going through the, as I'm handing it over and just talking to him. And I can see on the walls there's pictures of family. His daughter was there who'd made us a lovely buffet. And there was neighbours knocking on his door to see if he's okay. Because he'd recently come out of hospital having had a minor operation. So you think, clearly this man is loved. This is a really loved man. He's a very calm, gentle, softly spoken man who's clearly really well thought of. And I remember saying to Reg at the time, how have you done this, Reg? How have you ended up like this with clearly a great life, great people around you? I said, how have you done it? After all the stuff that you encountered all those years ago, how have you done this? And he kind of went on to tell me that basically when I was a young man, Glyn, he says, I decided that I did not want to grow up and be a bitter and twisted old man. He said, so I learned to forgive. And that one word, forgiveness, was like a big slap across the face to me. It really was. It really made an impact. So much so that, and I'm sorry, and actually one thing that Reg said was, he's not talking about, letting people do whatever they want to you and being treated like a fool. He says, generally in life, in the heat of the moment, people can say things they don't really mean, just out of anger. He said, they don't mean it. Most people. He says, so just learn to forgive. Life's too short. And I said, this really had an impact on me. So I remember driving home from having seen Reg. I remember it was like a 2-hour drive to get home. And this is just going over and over and over in my head. So much so that it motivated me to make contact with certain members of my family again, to track them down, to get to meet them again. And one in particular was my younger brother, Greg. Now, my younger brother, Greg, smashing kid. He's never done me any harm at all. He was just what I would call a victim of circumstance. He's within the family. I'd pulled away all those years ago, hence we never saw each other. But I managed to get hold of him, speaking to him on the phone, and he was over the moon that I got in touch with him. My brother Greg was in the army. He'd been in the intelligence corps and served in Afghanistan. He was now in the medical corps. And I said, look, I'd want to meet up with you. And he was absolutely over the moon. So we arranged to meet. But the weird thing was, I said to him, Greg, when I come and see you, I said, could you have your uniform with you? I'd love to photograph you. Bit of an odd request when you're not seeing somebody for so long. But that's what we did. I went to see him. It was an incredible day. But I actually photographed my brother in uniform. Now, if I'm honest, I didn't do this picture for Greg. It sounds kind of weird, but I didn't do it for Greg. I actually did it for my mom, because I was kind of hoping that I could basically give Greg the print and he would then go and give it to my mom. So I was using him as what I would call an olive branch. I wasn't feeling brave enough, strong enough, or mentally in that right frame of mind to be able to approach my mum. I wasn't ready for that yet, but I thought I could use Greg. But long story short is that he did give my mum that picture. Lots of tears of happiness, which is good to know. But again, long story short, we are now back together, reunited. And before all those years had passed, I was a proper mummy's boy. And I'm really making up for time now. I really am. So I'm back with certain members of my family. Some of them I'm not, but you can't have everything. That's just life, isn't it? But I'm so pleased as well that I get to see my youngest brother, Scott. This is Scott here. He's severely autistic, and I was really worried at the time when Greg took me to go and see Scott. And I didn't think that he'd recognise me, because if you think about now, all those years ago, what Scott would now see was completely different to what he would have remembered seeing. All those years ago, I had hair on my head and I didn't have a beard. But now it's the opposite. And I'm thinking, will he recognise me? And sure enough, when I go into his house, he's kind of looking at me, all kind of confused, because he doesn't speak, he does Makaton sign language. But the minute I spoke, he recognised me. He recognised my voice, and he jumps up, does his clapping thing, and it was just wonderful. And this is the picture that was taken on the day that we met up. But that's enough of me. But I guess more than anything, it kind of shows that there are benefits to doing projects that are far, far reaching, ones you would never expect, because I never expected a project on veterans to reunite me with my family. Incredible. But enough of me, moving on. This is a guy called Len Fox that you can see me photographing in a pub, which is a great place to do a photo shoot, in a pub. A lot more space, but I remember being invited to come and do this photo shoot at a place called Norfolk in the UK, and I'd set up in a corner of the pub. There were a number of veterans being brought along there. They're all varying ages, but all of them very elderly. I think the eldest one that came along was like 104. And I remember standing by the bar as they're coming into the pub, which is where they meet every month for their monthly kind of Norfolk Normandy veterans meeting. And I can see them coming in, and they clearly look their age, their mobility, some in wheelchairs, some being held on the arms, some with walking sticks or walking frames. But the minute they sit round this table, as they do every month, and then the bar staff give them a drink, beer, wine, spirits, you can see the years drop away. These people who are in their late 90s, early hundreds, become 18, 19 years old again. As the crude jokes start, the name calling, just great to see. And more than anything, what this showed me was how important it is to remain sociable. I've photographed a lot of veterans doing this project so far, and I've seen the difference between those who are sociable and those who remain behind closed doors. It is a massive, massive difference. But one of the guys I photographed when we were there was this chap. Wonderful man called Alan King, and I remember kind of sitting him down. We pulled the table over, and he's just resting how he felt comfortable. Had a bit of a chat with him, and I'm kneeling down in front of Alan, and I said, "Do you mind if I just move your medals around, Alan, make them nice and straight so it's easier to do now than later?" And as I'm doing that, I said, "What's this badge on your arm then? This patch?" And he says, "Oh, that's the seahorse." He said, "We called that the pregnant prawn." And I was like, "All right, well, what's that for then?" And he goes on to tell me, he said, that's the patch that they gave to the soldiers who were the first wave to land on the beaches on D-Day, the first ones to get onto the beaches. And I was like, wow. But he then goes on to tell me that they were also told that they reckoned they had 20 minutes to live. But he just said it like it was nothing. And I'm like, well, hold on a second, Alan. Did you just say 20 minutes? How do you deal with that? You're like 18, 19 years of age. I said, how do you deal with that, being told you've got like 20 minutes to live? And he goes, well, to be honest with you, Glyn, we wanted to get on the beach. He said, because everybody was unwell. They're throwing up on the landing craft. The sea was so rough. We wanted to get on the beach. I was just like, wow, absolutely incredible. But do you know what was fantastic about this? That last year, when we had the 75th anniversary of D-Day, in the UK, that coincided with the 50th anniversary of our 50p piece. And the Royal Mint, who were responsible for making the coinage, contacted me to see could they use the picture of Alan to bring out and commemorate this new coin. I was over the moon, as was Alan. So I contacted Alan to tell him what had happened, and he was over the moon that it was going to happen. But one thing I did do, again going back to that trust and being seen to do the right thing with these people, was that the licensing fee that I charged the Royal Mint for the use of the picture, every single penny of it went to the Veterans Charity. So veterans donated. I think it was, for me, it felt the right thing to do at the time, not to be seen to be making money on the back of veterans. Now, this guy here, this is a guy called Valerian Yavorsky, and every time I see this picture, I just kind of want to reach into the screen and grab his cheeks and squeeze them and say, "God, I wish you were my granddad." He is every bit the character that his face would suggest he is. Lovely, sweet, kind, just a wonderful man. I remember being contacted by a lady called Maria, who asked me if I would photograph Valek, as he was known, for the project, for the exhibition. And I was absolutely, yes, I will. I remember going to see him, sitting down at his kitchen table and him telling me about his life story, which he'd written. And he was telling me that when he was 14 years of age, living in Poland, in the early hours of the morning, the Russians came along and took him away, and they put him on a train and sent him to a labour camp along with his family and other members of the family, or other families around the village. But years later, he escapes and he joins the military, and he's in Monte Cassino. And if you know anything about military history, Monte Cassino was horrific, an awful, awful battle. He ended up getting shot in the head. But he said he used to wear a woolen hat, and on top of the woolen hat he would put his tin army hat. But the bullet pierced the tin hat, but got ravelled up in the wool, which is why it didn't penetrate his head. Just the most amazing stories this man was telling me. I managed to get his wife Glenys up as well to be photographed, which I thought was really, really important. And I was so glad that I did, because 3 weeks after having taken his picture, I'm sat at home watching TV with my wife, and this email comes through on my phone, basically from Maria to tell me that unexpectedly Valek had passed away. And this really took the wind out of my sails. It really did throw me, because this was the first veteran I got to spend time with, got to know, remember every minute of the photo shoot, but we'd now lost him. But looking at her email, it really did make me think, my God, pictures are so incredibly important. They're all we're left with. These pictures which will spark off memories. So glad that I did the picture of Valek, but more so that I actually got Glenys up, his wife, to have a picture taken with him as well. So glad of that. And on that kind of topic, you know, the natural thing here, where we are losing these people, these incredible people on a day-to-day basis, there are certain people that you become naturally more attracted to, I guess, or you connect better with, which is probably a better way of saying it. And this man here was one in particular. This is a guy called Frank Pendergast. What a wonderful man. What he did during the war was just incredible. He was in the 7th Battalion Parachute Regiment. Incredible man. And I'll never forget when I used to ring him up and he'd answer the phone and go, "That is you, this is me, hello." Just a real character. But Frank also passed away going back a few weeks ago now, and I was about to give a presentation to a camera club. And it's about an hour before the presentation, I got a phone call to tell me that Frank had passed. And I was completely, I just couldn't talk. When we actually did the presentation that evening, I'd forgotten that a picture of Frank was within it. So I had to turn the video off, turn the audio off, and apologise to the group that I just couldn't speak for a good 5 or 10 minutes. Just had to compose myself. I just never expected Frank to be gone. Just really didn't. Everyone loved him. Everyone knew Frank. Do you know what I mean? But the saddest thing of all of this is that people like Frank have not been able to have the send-off that they so rightfully should have had during these times. That's what's really, really sad. But I am so glad I took his picture, that members of his family have got this now to keep forever. Do you know what I mean? Just a bit of effort is going to mean so much to so many people, which I just love. I love how photography can give that gift. Do you know what I mean? I really do. Now, moving on, this is a guy called Idwal Simmons. Wonderful man, real statuesque, real kind of statesman, kind of strong character. And you'll notice with this picture here is he's not looking at the camera. And this links back now to what I mentioned at the start there about the chimp, Zayden, who wasn't looking at the camera. So, you know, I just think for me, it just adds much more power to the portrait. Now, I want to play you a short video now. And it's of this gentleman here. Again, another veteran that I've become incredibly close to. This is David Edwards. I want to play you a video which is where I went back to him, as I do with every veteran, to give him his portrait. So in the mount, like I said already, it's a £3 mount, makes it feel special. I want to show you the reaction that David gave to me, because I've seen this many times. I did it with my mobile phone. But this reminds me so much of why I do what I do. It's a reaction that money just can't buy. But as a photographer, for me, it just does not get better than this. So I want to play you now how David Edwards, World War II veteran David Edwards, reacted to getting his portrait. Nobody's seen it yet, apart from me. All right, and do you want to have a look at it then? Turn it over.
Oh my God. Oh boy, that's a portrait. That is brilliant.
Lovely, isn't it?
You've even got that cheeky, silly look about
It's like
it.
a painting.
It's lovely. Oh, just look at that.
Family.
I can't get over it. Even your tie's at an angle. Look at it.
Nicest photograph I've ever had taken.
He's in tears now.
Oh, bless.
Yeah, look at that. It was worth all the work, wasn't it?
It was worth the second visit.
It was worth the second visit, definitely.
I could see
But you've
it.
got his hands as well, is so good.
I used to do a lot of painting, and very often it's more, you know better than me, it's more important what you leave out than what you put in, isn't it?
That's it.
It's gorgeous.
But look at the arms and the
Aye,
chairs
and
going
this-
through there.
Fades away there, look.
It's lovely.
And there, and your point of interest
Point
comes
of
on there.
interest is your face.
Lovely, yeah.
Every time I see that, I'm just beaming smile as I see that reaction. But you're probably thinking that the words that David's using there, you know, talking about your point of interest is here and it fades away here, you think he's a really creative man, and he really, really is very creative. As he mentioned, he's always done a bit of painting, but he's also written loads of poems, and I want to finish this presentation off shortly with a little poem that David did. I'll explain more about that in a moment, but I'm going to play that for you in just a moment. Just a couple more people I want to tell you about is this was one here. This is a guy called George Avery. Now, I was contacted by George's daughter, Catherine, to see if I would photograph her dad, but you could just tell there was something about her voice when she was speaking to me about it that just kind of seemed a bit... There was something she wasn't telling me. And sure enough, as I eventually kind of get it out of her, she tells me that her dad, George, is suffering with advanced stages of dementia. And although she wants to have a picture taken so he can be part of the project and appear in the exhibition and the forthcoming book, she says, I don't know if we'll be able to do it. And I think, no, we can do this. We definitely can do this. Every veteran deserves to have this portrait taken. We just have to deal with it differently. Again, it's adapting to who you're with. So with George, I just did things a lot slower, but more of the same. Because the way that George's dementia showed itself was that 1 minute he'd be this 97, 98-year-old man who was just very calm and gentle and quiet. But then all of a sudden, his whole demeanour would change, and he'd almost behave, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, he'd almost behave like a spoilt child. And this change in personality and character could just happen at the split second. So when I was taking his portrait, you could see this. I'd take one picture, he'd completely change for the next picture. So what I decided to do was take more pictures, not rushing it, still keeping it nice and calm and slow and gentle so as not to stress him out or upset him. But I did more pictures. And the reason for that was because I found that when I did get a good expression from George, maybe he wasn't posing quite right. And then on the other side, when I did get a great pose that he was in, sitting nicely, I then found the head, the portrait wasn't quite right. So what I did, and I didn't tell the family this, but in Photoshop, I then did a head swap. Chose a great pose, a great expression, put them together. And you get some people that are kind of saying that's not really photography, but I couldn't care less. I really couldn't care less. This is a feel-good factor project. This is what it's all about, making people feel good. You know, I didn't want to be able to give Catherine, his daughter, and George a portrait that they would look at, and in years to come maybe Catherine would look at and think that's when Dad wasn't well. That's not what this is about. If I have to do a head swap to give them a good feeling, I will do that. And I remember distinctly Catherine saying to me when I gave them the picture, now I've got my dad back. Mission accomplished. Absolutely mission accomplished. So a bit of poetic license, yeah, it comes in handy every now and again, and I will do it if the need calls for it. Now, the last person I want to show you is this guy here. This is Squadron Leader Alan Scott, who has become a very dear friend. I speak to Alan very often throughout the week, and we meet up. Even though we're on restriction, we do still meet up, because at 99 years of age, Alan is still driving. He's a wonderful man. He is our only living Spitfire ace. At the age of 18 years of age, he was flying Spitfires at the tail end of the Battle of Britain. He also fought in the Battle for Malta, a horrific 10-week-long battle, Malta was the most bombed place on earth. Alan was in that at 19 years of age. Just incredible. What a wonderful, wonderful man who lives half an hour from where I currently live, but he's had an amazing, amazing life. I mean, this is Alan shaking hands with King George VI. Just wonderful. And I love these old photos of when Alan received the Distinguished Flying Medal and he's there with his parents. A very, very proud day as a young man all those years ago when he's getting those medals. Now, like I said, Alan's 99, but in next year, Alan will be 100, and he's already signed up that he'll be flying the Spitfire again on his 100th birthday. He did it already at the age of 96, as you can see here. He's not allowed to take off and land, but once they're up in the air, it's over to you, Alan, and he goes off and does the victory rolls and what have you. But just wonderful, absolutely wonderful. What a great, great man. He really, really is. And listen, I've talked and talked about these people. I could talk a lot more about these people, but what I want to do now, I want to end this talk by showing you a poem by World War II veteran David Edwards, who, like I say, has become a great friend. And this is a poem that David wrote when he was a young boy during the war. It's called Normandy 44. And I want to play this because what I did with this poem was I went to see David and recorded him reading his poem. I then edited the voice, made up the music for it. We got some World War II archive footage and put it together. And this was played at the very first exhibition, 3-month-long exhibition of the project to honour these veterans. So I want to play that for you now. David was a guest of honour at this exhibition here. And I did show him the video before the exhibition because it's quite powerful. So thank you so much for listening. Yeah, this is the best thing I've ever done as a photographer. It really, really is the most emotive, fulfilling project I have ever worked on and will continue to work on, photographing veterans. But I'm going to leave you now with the poem Normandy 44, written and read by veteran David Edwards.
Khaki-clad, we lie in wait, close by the embattled Norman shore. Each man conscious of his fate to weave a tapestry of war in Normandy. Soon the evil roar of 1,000 guns defiles the summer sky, as fate decides which of its sons will be the next to die in Normandy. Brave citizens of France with loyal hearts face the hell of conflict loosened from its chain. Our steadfast families play their lonely part, suffer death or misery or pain in Normandy. No red-coat tale of glory here we tell, where every yard of bocage takes its toll. The thrill of action soon loses all its spell, and war seals horror in our soul in Normandy. Then fear takes second place to pride. The tired and mighty armies pause before we all move up for the next assault in the noble fight for peace and freedom score in Normandy.